Hey everyone, welcome to another one of my gear recommendation videos. This week I thought I'd do something a little bit different, which is instead of talking about a specific product, talk about a family of product, in this case, camera cages. So I thought about this video because one of the most important accessories I own is in fact camera cages. For the most part, I don't buy a camera without also buying a camera cage. So I have here 5 camera cages for 4 different cameras that I own. And I just thought I'd spend a few minutes talking about what a camera cage is and why I find them so important. So first of all, before I get started, just my usual disclaimer that this is not a sponsored video. I buy all the gear in these videos with my own money. I'm not a spokesman for the product. I'm not affiliated with the company. All my thoughts and ideas and experiences are strictly my own based upon my time spent with the gear. Any experiences are just my own and may be either erroneous or incomplete. So if you are interested in the product, I strongly suggest doing additional research to make sure it fits your needs well. So with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at these camera cages. So all these camera cages are made by the same company, which is Smallrig. Smallrig is well known for its camera cage production. There are other companies that do make camera cages, but I do not have experience with those, only with Smallrig. So the 5 cages that you see here actually cover 4 different cameras, and we can look at some of the differences between them to get a better sense of what camera cages are all about. So let's answer that question first. What, in fact, is a camera cage? So a camera cage is essentially a metal frame that goes around the camera and that can attach to the camera and keep the camera in a secure position. So let's just take a look at one of these here. Let's just move a few out of the way. So this is the camera cage for the Sony ZV-E10. So as you can see, it's basically a metal frame, 4 sides, goes all the way around, and the camera sits right in the middle here. There's a grip here, made of sort of a textured rubber silicone thing, and also a textured rubber mat here, which sort of grips the camera. Additionally, there are attachment points located on all 4 sides of the cage. There's a cold shoe mount located here. There's a mounting screw located on the bottom. And in this particular one, there are openings for your camera strap to go through. So if I take my ZV-E10 here, so here's the camera itself without the lens. And as you can see, it basically just snaps right in to the cage itself. Now this brings up an important point, which is that camera cages are generally not interchangeable. Smallrig makes the camera cages for each specific camera, so you have to make sure that when you're going to buy a camera cage for your camera, that it is in fact the right one. So this one that fits my Sony ZV-E10 will not fit my Canon Mark II. As far as what advantages a camera cage provides, well, the first one is simply protection. Basically, you've taken your camera now and surrounded it with a metal frame, which means that if you bump your camera on the sides or the bottom or the top, you now have some degree of protection against the camera. Now, it's still possible to bump it. If you were to come in from this angle here, there's nothing protecting it. Likewise, if you hit it from the front and you have a lens on, there's nothing protecting it. But it is more protected now than when it is by itself. Secondly, these cages can often improve the ergonomics and handling of the cameras in question. So for example, on this Sony ZV-E10, the grip here is pretty small. And really for my hands, this grip really is too small to really be comfortable. But this cage adds a nice little grip extension, which when you mount the camera into the cage, as you can see, it goes right around and over the native grip of the camera, giving you an extra grip to hold on to. And this grip for me, the one that's added by the cage, is very, very comfortable. Likewise, if you use your camera a lot for especially video, but almost anything where you need some kind of attachments, these Smallrig cages have 1/4 inch attachments on every side, and some of them have 3/8 inch attachments. There's basically a wide variety of attachment points available. Now, it's important to note that these attachment points change or are not the same from camera to camera. So for example, if we look at the one for my Canon M6 Mark II, we can see that the design is different, right? So we have a different number of quarters up here, and we have the cold shoe mount on that side versus a cold shoe mount on that side. If we look at the side here, we can see again a different number of 1/4 inch mounting points, a different number on the bottom, although actually it's the same number, but different configuration, and a different number on the side. The functionality you will receive from your cage for your particular camera, it will depend exactly how that cage is designed. Additional functionality you often get on these cages is the ability to easily mount your camera into a tripod, because many of these cages are designed with a built-in Arca Swiss plate mount. So normally on a tripod, such as this one here, the tripod comes with a plate, and you would attach this plate to the bottom of your camera, or you could use a third-party expansion plate if you wanted to. And then once this plate is attached to the bottom of your camera, as in here, you would then attach the plate into the tripod. But one of the nice things with many of these cages is that this little back section here is actually the mount itself, and can simply go in and screw down, and now you have your cage mounted directly into the tripod without the need for this plate. So not only is this convenient, it's much quicker to swap things in and out, but one of the downsides to these sorts of plates with just have the one screw is that the plates tend to pivot around the screw. No matter how much you tighten them, your camera tends to get out of alignment. But in this case, there's no pivot point because it's the whole plate that's attaching, so the camera does not move. Now again, this is the ZV-E10. It's got the built-in Arca Swiss plate. Here's the Canon M6 Mark II. Same thing, built-in Arca Swiss plate. And here is the one from my Sony ZV-1 that does not have a built-in Arca Swiss plate. So it's not in every camera, but it is in a lot of them. And again, that's just another nice little benefit that using these cages have. Now, it's important to note that the cages can sometimes cause problems with your camera's functionality. Let's just fold this tripod up and get it out of the way. I'm just going to move that over here. Now, for example, on this Canon M6 Mark II, which I have here, I have a lens for it. This is actually an EF lens, which I use an adapter to mount into an EFM camera mount on the camera itself. Now, this adapter has a little heel which you can attach if you're using a big lens to take the weight of the lens off the camera when it's on a tripod. So you could attach this little heel onto here, and once you have the heel on, then you mount the heel to the tripod. The problem with this is that if I have my cage on, this heel does not attach correctly into the camera. I can't mount this adapter with the heel, with the plate on, with the cage on. So it's just to be aware that sometimes these cages will interfere with some of the native functionality of the camera. And sometimes they do not. For example, on this M6 Mark II, this comes with a removable viewfinder, which you can actually attach into the hot shoe mount. Like that. And you might think that this would interfere with the attachment of the cage, but in fact, the cage has been designed so that it does not. You can actually fit the cage right on there, and it does not interfere with the viewfinder in any way. It's just something to be aware of, that when you're buying a cage, you may sometimes have problems with certain aspects of lenses and your camera. Another example is if you have a very wide lens, they will sometimes not fit through the opening here, and you will actually have to remove the lens, put the cage on and off, versus if you were to have a smaller lens, then you can just put this in over the lens if you have a lens cap on. Now, it always depends on your use case, on how much value you're going to find in a cage. These cages are not all created equal. So we were talking about the Sony ZV-E10, and we were talking about the Canon M6 Mark II, my 2 cages for that. I do not use these cages to the same degree. For my ZV-E10, which I use primarily for video, I use this cage all the time. This cage is always attached to my ZV-E10. I attach power banks, and I attach sound recorders, and I attach monitors, and the grip is so good on here that it really increases the ergonomics. It gives the camera a nice weight. Basically, this is the most important accessory for my ZV-E10, this camera cage. On the other hand, for my Canon M6 Mark II, I barely ever use this cage, and I don't really like this cage. Part of the reason I don't like it is because this grip is like very smooth, and it's just metal. There's no plastic or rubber on there to give it a nice textured feel. And the grip on the Canon M6 Mark II by itself is actually better than the grip provided by the Smallrig cage. Additionally, I use my Canon M6 mostly as a photography camera, and as a result, I don't use attachments on it too often. So if I don't use attachments and the cage itself, the grip is uncomfortable, there really isn't much reason for using this, especially if when I'm using my adapter, it doesn't even work in the cage anyway if I want to put this heel on it. Well, I do use it every once in a while if there's something very specific I'm doing. I may put the cage on to mount something, but it is very, very rare. Versus ZV-10, the cage never comes off the camera. Another example of that is my cage for the Sony ZV-1. Now this cage is a little different, obviously. We can see here, it's basically half a cage. It has a bottom and it has a side. And you can see here the grip here is even different. It's a sort of a wood grip, and again, it's smooth. It's got a little bit of texture there. There's sort of like a wood grain texture to it. It's not quite as smooth as the M6. I use this some of the time. One of the advantages of the ZV-1 is that it is a very small, light, easy to transport camera. And anytime you attach anything to a camera whose main advantage is how small and light it is, you're taking away the advantage of that camera. If I put this on my ZV-1, I'm sort of devaluing the primary strength of the camera. That being said, there are times when I do want to attach something, or I do want the additional functionality of having this cage on the ZV-1, so I will put it on. Another thing to note, that on the ZV-1, one of the design flaws of the camera is that if you mount the camera to a tripod or a grip with the center mount screw hole, you can't get the battery door open without taking the whole camera off, which means you can't change the battery, you can't change the SD card without taking the camera off the mount, the tripod. With this cage, because this cage actually relocates the camera mount screw hole off to the side here, you can actually open the battery door and have full access to the SD card and the battery when this cage is on here. So in this cage actually corrects a design flaw that is sort of inherent to the ZV-1, which is nice. So again, that's another benefit to having a cage. Sometimes they can actually make the camera a little bit better, even if they can't necessarily change the underlying functionality or build of the camera. Now, another thing to look at is here, I have these 2 cages. So these cages are both for my A7C, which is right here. As you can see here, these cages are similar, but they are different. And the most noticeable difference is this grip. Like the cage for my ZV-E10 is a nice grip. It's got a nice texture, sort of a silicone rubber thing, and it folds right over the grip on the A7C, which is not as nice as the Canon grip, but is still pretty good. Goes right over it and sort of folds in around it. I can either use this cage, which has the grip, or likewise, you can use this cage from my A7C, which does not have a grip and uses the built-in grip for the actual camera itself. Now for me, on the A7C, if I'm using this grip is a little too big for me. I don't really like this grip. It's not bad, but it's a little bit too big for my hand. It makes the camera just feel a little bit too unwieldy. Whereas if I use the cage without the extra grip, it feels better. So sometimes I do want the extra grip, sometimes I don't. So I will switch between cages depending on my use case again. And for me, the A7C is also used primarily for video. So there are always attachments that I'm using and things like that, which make the cages definitely more helpful. But unlike the ZVE10, I don't always use a cage with my A7C. There are times I do not. Additionally, most of the cages come with attachment tools at the bottom. So for example, this one here has a little screwdriver down here, which is magnetically attached, and you can screw it in here and mount your cage that way. This M6 Mark II comes with a little tool here that sort of magnetically attaches across this little point. You can take that thing out and use that. And this one here, this ZV1, is a little bit different. This one actually doesn't come with a tool. It uses a little tiny little hex key to attach this little screw to the camera. And it does come with a hex key, but again, it's a little bit awkward because you don't want to lose this thing. Because if you lose this thing, you're never going to be able to get it on and off. So it'd be nice if maybe there was a little attachment point for this little hex wrench here, but there isn't. So that one's a little bit different. So again, when thinking about buying a camera cage, it's important to consider your use case. Do you need the attachments? Do you need the ergonomics? Do you need the additional functionality? Camera cages are generally not that expensive. Depending upon camera, the cages can range from $30 to $60, $70, $80. Again, for me, I generally consider them to be an integral part of purchasing a new camera is to get the cage for it. I may never use the cage. I may not use it very often, but I may use it all the time. And in the end, you don't really know until you actually get the cage exactly how it changes the camera, because that is one thing the cage does. It changes how the camera feels. It changes the weight, changes the space that it takes up. It changes the balance. It changes the way it feels in your hand. Sometimes it changes it like 100% for the best. And like with my ZVE10, it's perfect. The cage for this camera is just absolutely perfect. It just totally transforms this camera into something much better than what Sony shipped it with. For the M6 Mark II, no, it doesn't help. The M6 Mark II that Canon designed is better without the cage than when you put Smallrig's cage on. Usually it's somewhere in between, like with the A7C, where the cage offers some advantages that are useful some of the time, but some of the time you would never bother to use it, and it's totally up to your use case, your scenario, and how much you need the functionality. So I hope you enjoyed this look at camera cages. I'll be back with another video where I talk about some of my favorite accessories for the camera cages. But until then, take care. All right, bye-bye.